Hello, and welcome to the Effects Corner. I'm your host, Scott Squires, and I'll be discussing the art and technique of visual effects. As always, if you'd like to make a comment or suggestion, you can visit the website at effectscorner.blogspot.com. I'll be showing a commercial I directed and did the effects for. The effects are relatively simple, but I thought it would be good to run through some of the issues, even on a simple spot. So here's the commercial itself. Let's just take a look and see some of the different elements involved in this. So when we shot this, as discussed, I went ahead and shot somebody in the actual scene, both actors in the majority of the scenes. I didn't bother with blue screen or other types of things, blue screen costumes or green screen costumes. It was just easier to deal with this way. I knew I'd probably be rotoscoping the edges. We put orange tape on the bottom of the shoes here, just so that I could read them later. They wouldn't fall into the shadows and things like that. This actor, I had him hold up his arms so that they wouldn't cover up the pants themselves. And then, as you can see, the other actor, I had him wear shorts and socks. We wanted to go ahead and keep the socks. I went ahead and put some red up above here just to make it, once again, a little bit easier to read. And the idea here is to go ahead and cut a mat and keep that sharp edge on these edges, but then loose on the rest of it, and use the clean plate. And so here's the clean plate just as a reference. The other thing to know is as I mentioned before, it was a windy day, so we see lots of wind going on here and even up in this area. So in some of those cases I had to split it out and to deal with it separately. But the other thing to note with this and several other shots, and I'll go into that in a moment, is we have a section here where the front foot is actually covering part of the back pants. Now remember, once I rotoscope this and replace it with the clean footage, we're supposed to see those pants, so I'll have to go in there and paint. All the roto and compositing was actually done in Commotion, just because that has the most flexibility for rotoscoping, and I could do a few of the specialty things. In this case, I used the super clone tool to go ahead and copy from frames before and after to replace that. The other thing to note is when his arm swings back behind him on this actor, it gets hidden by his chest, which is fine, but it actually is lower than his chest. Let's take a look at that. So it would actually hang down here somewhere, and so that would mean that I have to create that arm. So I'll go into that in a moment as well. And then we have overlapping of the one foot in front of the other. You can see here I'm clipping off. The other thing to note is, of course, I've got to take care of these shadows. I've got to remove his upper body from this shadow and remove the foot sections here from that shadow. Let's just take a look. There's our clean plate again. And so here I've actually clipped the shadows. And then I have to do the same thing, but in reverse for this other guy. You can see how it's clipped here, so I'm losing the pants section of that. And by using the real shadows, I'm having them interact and move around as they should do with the rest of it. One of the things I also did with a number of the shots was shoot a reference. And here we have the actor walking with the post. And what that gives me is a reference for where the waist will be, because it's a little difficult with the stretched out shadow to see exactly where that should be as it compared to what I think it might be. So at least this gives me a frame of reference. I can choose to ignore it if I want to, but I have something to base that on. Now let's take a look at the the actual details on this particular shot. Okay, so here we can see the roto splines that I've been using for the pants in this particular shot. All the rotoscoping compositing was done in Commotion. The critical factor here was the edge of the pants and the bottom edge of the pants. And you can see in rotoscoping I've broken up each area into different sections. That allows me to try to easily move them, rotate them, and overlap them as need be and control their feathering and other issues. Whereas if I try to rotoscope the entire body, I'd have to make very complex shape changes for each and every time that legs crossed over or did something like that. In this case, I've also set the feathering of the edges to be at least 1 or 2 pixels for video resolution, and I've turned on full motion blur, so I'm sure to get some of the blurring and natural edges that I would hope to get from the original. So as I mentioned before, had some issues with the pants overlapping themselves, and here you can see what happens once I've rotoscoped that out and replaced it with a clean background. I end up with a hole where I should be having pants. So let me turn on my paint layer, and you can see I've actually replaced that. So as the leg goes across, it's now doing the right thing. And in this case, I just used the super clone brush. I won't actually go through it here, but just copying from the frame before, a couple of frames before, and keeping that going, and then the frame after for where it passes by. And that allows me to easily fill in certain blank sections. We also have another spot in here, and this will show you where we have the foot crossing over itself. So it's the same basic issue, is trying to restore something. You can see the crossover happening here, and this once again with the paint layer on. Turn that off, and this is what I originally had after the rotoscoping of the pant legs on this particular actor. So we've lost our sock and shoe during this moment here. So once again, I created a paint layer and restored it from a previous frame. And in this case, since the shoe is moving, the foot is moving, I'm actually repositioning it, angling it, and trying to get it to line up and match and work as a flow when the animation is, or when it's playing back as animation. And the other thing, as we talked about before, you can see that we have an arm up here, whereas in fact this is the area that was rotoscoped. So what I've done, let me see if I can turn that on and off. There we go. So in fact I actually shot my own arm, and I'll show you that in a moment, and then composited that in behind this by using the roto splines here to keep his chest separate. And then I set the keyframes to match his arm swing. In some of the shots I kept his real arm as much as I could and just replaced it while it was going behind him. In a few other shots I went ahead and removed his real arm and just replaced it. It was the same swing motion, but just sometimes to make it a little bit more consistent. So as I mentioned, here's the arm, and let's take a look. This was the original element. I just shot a digital still of my own arm with some even lighting in this case, and just had a green poster board. That's not special green screen. Went into Photoshop, did the basic extraction, rounded out a section here, and then went ahead and placed that, shrunk it down in size, and set up a pivot point near the top of the shoulder, and have it swing to match the actor's motions and so forth. And in this shot and some of the other shots, you'll actually see his arm has some highlights to it. And in those cases where I did need to match into or blend in, I would actually paint restore some of the highlights onto a paint layer so that it matched in and blended and looked like it worked within the shot. So that was the basic premise, is just going ahead and shooting an arm and sticking it in there. So this is our next shot here. And here you can see them chasing after each other. And let's just take a look at a little bit more detail on that. The original looks like this. You know, it's the same basic outfit walking across. And if you notice the leaves back here, we've got quite a bit of movement, and we have a person who will be going behind this. So these all took different procedures to take care of. And I also had the shadows on this, very strong shadows as well. And here's our clean plate. And as you can see, I've cut down the shadow here. You can also notice we've got a lot of very nice motion blur on the legs and the pant legs. And that's because I'm trying to use as much of the real as we can, and that's one advantage you have over, instead of compositing the pants on top of this scene, is I automatically get all the true motion blur. And now for the edges, what I do is in the Rotosplines and Commotion, and I guess I should mention this entire project was done using Commotion, both the rotoscoping and the compositing. I've turned on motion blur for the rotosplines, and in some cases I've gone in and done a little bit of paint touch-up just to make that look even better in a couple of spots. And so I have to go ahead and extract this person, roto around him, and had to replace a lot of this background here with the moving, all the moving foliage, because we have our other person walking across. And for the point where he crosses over, I basically super clone back in part of our man from a few frames before, and with painting I go ahead and average it over, basically doing kind of a soft white but very specific to the shot in terms of placement and timing and so forth. And then this is the hopscotch scene. So there's a couple of interesting issues going on here. For one thing, you'll notice, and let me go back to the original plate so that you can see what we're having to deal with here, is we have, of course, the feet are getting in front of some of the pant legs. I'll go into more detail in a moment to fill that in. It's also a fairly non-shadowed day here, I mean in this section, because it's already shadowed, so you'll see some light shadows here, mainly around the shoes, so I'll have to do some work to kind of fake that to make that work correctly. The other thing is I'm looking at a very oblique angle into what would be the inside of these socks, and you can see I've placed an inside, even though this is all done as a 2D process. I'm putting some internals there and trying to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. And technically it should be seen up inside the guy's body, but I didn't want to start that especially as close as I am to the cut, just because that would tend to stand out and draw your attention there. The other thing you can probably notice, I've got some dirt here I'll have to paint out. Now with the hopscotch, we had the feet actually going in front of part of the pants, and so once they've been rotoscoped out and replaced with the clean plate, we have these big gaps here. So in Commotion I went ahead and created some roto shapes that would animate and match to what I would think would be the inside of the pants. And because I can see my composite at the same time I'm working on the rotoscope, I'm able to shape them accordingly. And we can see how that works as they move along, jumping and so forth. And once again I've turned on motion blur so that everything tries to look as natural as possible throughout all these shapes, trying to keep the original pants. And then the other thing with this shot and with several other shots, let's just take a look here. We expect to see the inside of the sock, but once again in reality we shot it just with the pant leg here, and so I clipped that off with the roto and removed the rest of the pants and body up to the shirt. And so by creating a fake inside of a sock, and I did this. This is once again same technique throughout. I've created a still of just the sock. Took a photograph into Photoshop and distorted it to match the basic shape of the sock, and then within Commotion I would go ahead and do a compression, vertical compression on it, as well as horizontal stretch or compression to match the relative angle of the foot. And that seems to work pretty well, especially in motion as you see this go through. And then we have the second foot come in, and we'll see inside there as well. So a way to try to achieve the look of 3D. Let me turn on the other side. There you can see that coming back. To achieve the look of 3D without actually dealing with the full 3D render type of modeling process. Okay, in this next scene, one thing to notice is the pants go underneath this barrier, and our other actor has to walk around it. So in this case, it was actually shot as two pieces. Let's just bring up the first one. So this is our pant actor, and there is no barrier here. He just walks straight through. Just like that. So shot that piece, and then shot the piece with just our other actor, and now you notice that we've got this barrier in. So as I combine the different elements together, this is two different elements, and I was able to split this out and reuse this for the part where the pants go underneath. The idea here was just to get a little bit more sense that there wasn't anything in, just like a magician trying to make sure that people understood that there's no guy inside the pants, and to make sure that looked like something worthwhile was actually happening. And all of our same issues apply to this as well, in terms of the shadows and breaking those up and taking care of the edges. Okay, so this next shot that we're covering is the pants reacting and then moving away. There's a few interesting issues here. Let me go to the original again, just so that you can see what that looks like. So here we have our shoes and our actor, and you can see we've got shadowing going beyond the top of the actor, so I'll have to deal with that. Luckily we do have some nice shadows going along the wall, and I'll have to change some of that. And in this case, the other thing to note here is that once again we're seeing inside the pants in a few of the frames, and more importantly we're seeing inside this area here. Let's just toggle back and forth. I've got them out of sync a little bit, I guess. But the idea is to go ahead and place an inside into the pants, and I'll do a breakdown of that momentarily. So these are the leaning pants, and in this case you can see I've rotoscoped and removed the man, but now I'm left with the hole where we expect to see the inside of the pants. So in order to do that, I went ahead and shot once again just a simple digital still, and this is a green poster board. I've stuffed the pants with some clothing just so it stays open the way I wanted to get it in the same basic shape as an open pair of pants, and created a matte in Photoshop, just brought it in as still. One of the reasons I did the matte in Photoshop is because I'm dealing with the still, and rather than recalculating a composite and a matte extraction for each and every frame, I went ahead and just created the matte ahead of time. And then by placing that in here, and now I've complete the look, and I go ahead and do a final color balance and brightness balance as well, and add a little shading inside here. The critical thing here was, as the pants move around, is trying to shape it and position it accordingly. I used a little bit of After Effects for some of the distortion and displacement taking place here, just to make sure everything lined up. And I did a bit of tracking, but by and large most of this was done by eye and by hand, just to make that work. So this is the last shot that we'll be discussing. Here's the catching up to the pants, reaching out. A couple things to notice here is you can see the shadows going across and moving across all of this, and that would be hard to reproduce exactly. It's one nice thing with the actual shadows. The other thing to note with all of these shots, what I've done is had the actors go through the action and then just exit the scene while the camera is running, and we run an additional 10 seconds just so I have plenty of clean plate footage. And because I don't wait till I do all the shots and then finally shoot the clean plate, which sometimes you do because of the time issues, the problem with that is the lighting could change, something may happen in between, and as long as I know that I've shot the clean plate right before or right after the actual take, then it's more likely to match. And now let's take a look at the original footage and how it looked when it was shot. It's all the same types of things as before. The other thing you'll notice, there's a few places where the hand goes behind his pants. Those are things as an effects supervisor you try to keep an eye on, just to minimize that if possible. And then once again in the final, I've gone ahead and done some paint work and cleaned up some of that to add that back in. Well, that wraps it up for today. I hope you've learned a few things from this podcast. And thanks again for listening, or in this case, watching the Effects Corner podcast. Thank you.